Anyways, through and through, the rule of designing things to convey existing fears is to make it look enough like something to be thematic, while at the same time making it so strange looking, or have it at least move so otherworldly, that your brain isn't sure what to make of what it's seeing. That's the genre in a nutshell. The question of, what did I just see, and what does it mean? Show something for too long and it loses impact. Show something for only a split second, and it may not convey everything you want it to convey. But either way, you should always leave your audience with enough information to have a loose idea of what something was and what it was doing, but not enough information to form a perception of it. The first encounter with the thing was a dog thing. Well, you said— I know what I said, jerk. But look at this thing. It just looks like a giant pile of meat and tendrils that happens to have enough features that you suspected it may have once been a dog. Then a flower made of tongues comes out of it, and a couple of arms burst out of its body, and it tries to pull itself through the roof. And you're sitting here along with the characters going, what the hell is that? What's it doing to those dogs? Who cares? Kill it with fire! And then they kill it with fire, and even after it's dead, they're looking at it, and they still have no clue what it is. If this scene was in a survival horror game, a skinless dog would have jumped out at you, and you would have shot it, looked down and gone, oh, skinless dog. Moving on. But that's existing fears. The power of horror is that you can teach people to be afraid of anything, if you condition them to. If I give you ice cream, and then I whip you with a garden hose, the next time I offer you ice cream, you're probably going to say no. If I ring a little bell, and then I use a cattle prod on you for the next hour, and then I just keep repeating that for the next 10 years, odds are you're going to hate playing with my ding-a-ling. Now, that's fine for peanut bells, it's fine for bells, and it's fine for jump scares. We have something howl in the distance every time something shows up and attacks you, but that can easily just give you forewarning and make something even less threatening, especially if the enemy is not threatening to begin with. To properly condition an audience, there has to be a real negative consequence to the thing you're trying to make them afraid of. If you're writing a movie and the sinister music kicks in, and the axe murderer stumbles on the frame and spends the next 5 minutes getting tangled in folding chairs and tripping over children's toys, by the end of the film you're probably going to find that music funny. By the same token, if you're making a game and the enemies or environments you're foreshadowing or associating are not dangerous or unsettling, you're not accomplishing anything. By that same token, if you give the player too much power over his environment, it doesn't matter how potentially threatening you make your monster, because they'll just kill it with one shot and then move on. However, if you make them unable to deal with enemies at all, they'll just ignore them, or they'll get frustrated that you're cheating them, and either way, they're not going to be terrified. This is why survival horror, as a genre, loves ammo restrictions so much. It allows the player to have the ability to deal with any enemy they come across, but risk long-term consequences, meaning even a short-term victory is a long-term threat. There are other ways of dealing with this threat versus power problem in games, but the idea is always the same. Associate victory with defeat by keeping your audience invested in their own exposure to the thing you want to scare them. Even more than that, the only thing you're trying to associate dread to is a bad guy, you're also not doing it right. Remember, we're establishing tone, narrative, and so on for a purpose of our choosing. Whether it's the ability for even the most honorable people to betray their loved ones, or inability to connect with others on an emotional level, or the fear of being lost as an individual in the midst of a collectivist society. You're telling a story for a reason, right? If you want to make a story that makes the claim that people are incapable of truly connecting with one another, then it's up to you to create or exacerbate that fear in your audience. So, how do you do that? This shit is getting complicated. Well, we're getting back into how to write a story again. And I won't go into that too much, because again, it's complicated, and a whole other video of me complaining about something else. And being able to pull it off is what separates good writers from mediocre ones. But the general idea is always the same. Establish the concept you're trying to associate, and then link it with something your audience is horrified of. Every time the protagonist gets close to another character, they may end up hurting that person somehow. Is this better than killing off the character? Or the character betraying you? Well, that's up to you, Shakespeare. Writing is an exercise in personal exploration and the realization of the world around you using your own experiences. If you can't answer that question for yourself, you probably have no business writing. Writing is really complicated and time-consuming, believe me. Well, good writing. Good horror writing even more so, because it's necessary to get really abstract, and to link all sorts of concepts in unorthodox ways. Yet, since horror also attracts campy nonsense, which is, that's fine, it's also easy to churn out, and it's way easier to find poorly written horror than it is to find even mediocre horror. Much less anything good. There's way more terrible work in the genre that's memorable for being awful than there is even halfway decent work. So, we have all three of our elements: introspection from the audience, directive narrative, and an unsettling tone. Usually, movies, games, and books only have two of these three. Most movies are only concerned with gore and monsters, not any levels of introspection. There are some stories that have directed narrative and are thought-provoking, but they aren't scary. Just a little weird. Getting it all right is incredibly rare. Just as rare as your Citizen Kanes and your Bicycle Thieves. So I'm not saying it's easy. It's just easy to get wrong. Very easy. And that's bad. The world needs more horrifying stories that make you realize what a horrible, insecure person you are. Because you are a horrible, insecure person, and you need someone to remind you about it. And you also need to be scared half to death, just to keep you in check. It's a shame we can't create nightmare hellscapes that metaphorically carry our darkest thoughts into the incarnations of sin itself. But there's no reason we can't try. Human beings need to be abused. And I think the shit the genre expels from its quivering anus every year proves that. So, if you're a young person with a love for the macabre, and you spend an inordinate amount of time googling pictures of dead animals, you're the perfect candidate to make the next horror franchise. Get to writing, you monsters!